For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. On the surface, it seems as though in today's crazy society, professional sporting events are the only place where you can be 100% sure that you will not be shot at. We've seen tragedies and absolute craziness at just about every possible venue in America, from schools to movie theaters to music festivals to even presidential rallies where the Secret Service, in theory, should have the entire premises under surveillance and not allow anyone to get within a mile of spectators or a presidential candidate and former president with an assault weapon. But here we are, because that's apparently what society has come to now. However, it seems as though, God willing, thanks to tight security and increased safety measures, that if you go to a professional sporting event and enter a stadium, you will not be shot at. You may get injured in other ways, and nothing's stopping you from dying at the hands of getting into a fight or falling down an escalator. But at the very least, you will not die at the hands of a gun. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been incidents in NFL history where someone was able to successfully get into the stadium with a gun, because the 1980s were an absolutely crazy time. At Super Bowl 18, for example, there was a man who found a weakness in security and was able to leapfrog the fence at Tampa Stadium and sneak into the game with a gun. Fortunately, nothing happened, as he was tackled shortly after entering, but it was still a scary incident. During the 1981 divisional round game at Riverfront Stadium between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Buffalo Bills, a man was somehow able to get into the stadium and commit an armed robbery, as even though he never fired, he used his gun to steal over $10,000 at a concession stand, and was somehow never caught. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And perhaps most notably, at Super Bowl 21, New York Giants wide receiver Phil McConkey not only won the game, but maybe saved a ton of lives in the process when he noticed after the game that there was a gun on the field. And somehow, a gun found its way into the Rose Bowl. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. We've had some close calls that we've covered before on this channel, and God willing, it will remain that way where I don't have to add anything new to the queue. Having said that, despite everything I just said, there was one instance of active gunfire at an NFL game. There was one instance during a Monday Night Football game, as in this game right here, where shots were fired inside the stadium. You probably have never heard of this story before, because it's been forgotten about through NFL history for some reason. But 40 years later, it deserves a deep dive, especially in light of recent events, for just how crazy it was that something like this could happen, as well as the response to the event. Because in 1984, during a game at Three Rivers Stadium between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals, gunfire took place after an argument went horribly wrong. And if you stick around to the end, I promise you, this story has an insane plot twist that you're never going to believe. No exaggeration, no hyperbole. The plot twist at the end of this video might be the craziest NFL thing I've ever talked about. And I do not say that lightly, because I've talked about the NFL a ton on this channel. And this is the story behind the near tragedy that happened in Pittsburgh, and one of the only times in NFL history that there was active gunfire at a game. There's no really good way to transition into this next part, but before I do, if you like hearing stories about the weird and sometimes scary history of the NFL, then be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. I post every single day about the history of the NFL, and sometimes, as is the case with today's upload if you're watching as of this video getting released, it has to do with current events. So if you like that sort of stuff, then be sure to subscribe and help grow this community and make this the best place to talk about all things NFL history on this platform. Thanks for your support. Before I talk about the gunfire that rang out, we need some context to understand what felt absolutely secondary in the grand scheme of things, which was the actual game at hand. It's October 1st, 1984. It's Week 5 of the NFL season. And as we head into the second quarter of the year, we've got an AFC Central battle on our hands between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers over at Three Rivers Stadium. Aside from the fact that this is a nationally televised Monday Night Football game on ABC, back when that was a really big deal, because that was the only chance you got in the regular season to play on national TV, this was a monumental game for both of these teams. Entering the week, the Steelers sat in first place with a 2-2 record, while the Bengals were dead last with an 0-4 record. Neither team was off to a good start, with this applying to the Bengals more than the Steelers. However, if the Steelers won this game, they'd create some cushion in the division, as the only team above 500 through 5 weeks. While if the Bengals won, then despite a 1-4 start, they would somehow only be a game back of the division lead and would be right in the thick of things. As for how this game went, just about everything went Pittsburgh's way, as when all was said and done, the Steelers extended their lead on the AFC Central and won by a final score of 38-17. Pittsburgh's defense absolutely feasted on this night, with the Steelers having not one, but 2 pick sixes, as the Steelers forced 5 turnovers and got to Cincinnati's quarterback 6 times. At no point during the contest did the Steelers trail, and thanks to some strong running, with the team averaging well over 4 yards per carry, and some nice plays in the passing game by future Hall of Fame receiver John Stallworth, who had 6 catches for 119 yards, the Steelers were able to put away their AFC Central rival and send the fans home happy with the win to get above 500. However, while everything seemingly went well on the field, the same could not be said for what happened off the field. On the field, both of these teams were fighting for their survival in the metaphorical sense. Off the field, however, there was a fight for survival quite literally. At some point near the third quarter, there was an argument that took place between 39-year-old Willard Clark and 27-year-old Isaac Kim Gilbert. The two men were supposedly friends with each other, so I'm presuming they went to the game together. We don't know what started the argument, but it took place inside the stadium gift shop, and eventually went into the concourses of the venue, right by a refreshment stand. At this point, an officer, 36-year-old Regis Kelly, tried to intervene and get the two men to stop fighting. When he did that, however, it did not work out, as Clark punched Kelly down to the ground, committing aggravated assault against the police officer. At this point, Kelly, having been knocked to the ground, identified himself as a cop. However, at the time he identified himself, both Clark and Gilbert pulled out guns. It raises the obvious question of why the heck, if these two people were friends, did they draw guns on each other? But by this point, we had a crisis situation on our hands, because two men were able to successfully get into Three Rivers Stadium, and now we're pointing guns at each other in the concourse of Three Rivers Stadium. Said Charles Rowe, who worked one of the concession stands where this happened, they walked out here with guns in their hands. They stood here with the guns at each other's heads. Then they walked outside. The people were crazy. Now, I should note before going any further when talking about the game between these two teams behind me right here, at no point during this event did the game actually stop. The game continued even while there was an active shooter inside the concourse at Three Rivers Stadium. The play was not halted despite a shooter in the stadium. Now, this is kind of crazy to me on one hand, because obviously you don't know what the intentions of the gunman are, and there are people's lives that are at risk here. On the other hand, it does make some sort of sense to continue the game and continue some sense of normalcy, because the last thing you want to do is let people know there's an active shooter, and then you create mass hysteria, and then people would be running around the concourses trying to find shelter, and then at that point it's tougher to isolate the shooter. So I get both sides of the coin, even as crazy as it sounds. But this story is about to get really, really nuts. Because one of the first rules of gun safety is that you do not aim your gun unless you're firing. And sure enough, Isaac Kim Gilbert was about to fire, and he ended up grazing Officer Kelly in the forehead. You can actually see here in this black and white photograph of the event, Officer Kelly laying down and with blood coming down from his face, hanging on for dear life. May I remind you, all of this was taking place inside the stadium during the game. Eyewitnesses said that Gilbert was able to fire off not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 shots, which means that we are extremely fortunate that all that happened was a graze to the head for the officer, and that no other bystanders were impacted, because this could have been even more disastrous than it already was if some bystanders were just walking in the concourse of the stadium, and the next thing you know, they had a bullet in the back of their head. And the situation could have been a heck of a lot worse if it wasn't for the fact that after being grazed, despite being in immense pain, and despite nearly dying, Officer Kelly was able to fire a shot at Isaac Kim Gilbert, and was able to successfully wound him, shooting him in the shoulder, chest, and abdomen. Officer Kelly was a hero. Said an eyewitness, the cop returned his fire, and it dropped him. The cop got grazed in the head, and the other guy got hit and went down. Another eyewitness said, as the white guy went down, referring to Officer Kelly, he just emptied his gun, and the black guy, referring to Isaac Kim Gilbert, went down right in front of me. Amazingly enough, the Steelers, according to a spokesman, knew nothing about what was happening in their own freaking stadium. They didn't know about the gunfire. They had no idea that any of this was occurring. So maybe the fact that the game continued wasn't a safety precaution to keep people in their seats to prevent hysteria, but rather was sheer ignorance of the fact that there was literally an active shooter inside the stadium. Both Officer Kelly and Gilbert were in serious condition and had to be taken to the hospital, although both were able to make a recovery. So fortunately, there were no deaths in the matter somehow. Gilbert was in the hospital for a week in critical condition, but once he recovered, to the surprise of no one, he was arrested for shooting an officer. Said Stephen Joyce, a police assistant superintendent on the matter, Gilbert will be charged with attempted murder and aggravated assault of a police officer and violation of the Uniform Firearms Act. He's not going anywhere. 1 year later, in August of 1985, Gilbert was convicted of aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and a violation of the Uniform Firearms Act. He was sentenced to 6 to 12 years in prison. And I don't know what it was with Bengal games being absolutely riddled with controversy during the 1984 season, but that was the case, especially with stuff off the field. 3 weeks later, the Cincinnati Bengals, after this game behind me right here, played the Cleveland Browns, and you might remember that game because that was the infamous game where color commentator Reggie Rucker lied about having a pregame meal with Cincinnati Bengals head coach Sam Weish. There was a whole outrage about that. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And then 1 month later, the Cincinnati Bengals played the Seattle Seahawks, and there was a massive controversy over the condition of the field at Riverfront Stadium, particularly with how they handled the snow. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Again, I don't know what it was with Bengal games in 1984, but they were way more interesting off the field versus on the field. And in case you're wondering, astute observers of the channel and NFL history might remember another incident at Three Rivers Stadium. Long story short, a Steelers fan who was so upset with his team's performance and was so upset with the play of their quarterbacks decided that he was going to protest and do something about it. Not by doing anything rational, but instead by driving his car into the stadium and taking a joyride around the concourses. Seriously, the man was able to drive his car inside the concourses of the stadium, and security was unable to stop a man from doing that. You can learn more about that incident by clicking the card in the upper right corner. I think it's fair to say between that incident and the main incident in our video today, that security at Three Rivers Stadium in the 1980s absolutely stunk, and whoever was in charge of security at the stadium was asleep at the wheel. And getting back to the main incident in our story, the shooter, this man right here, Isaac Kim Gilbert, died sometime in 2023, whether that was late November or early December. And do you want to know an insane plot twist? You're never going to believe this because the truth is stranger than fiction. But somehow, I kid you not, He did not get a lifetime ban from Steeler games after this. Seriously. I won't link them, but I can verify that it is the same guy based on the description, the age, and based on the address. And there are photos on his Facebook where he is at Heinz Field attending Steeler games. You would think being an active shooter at a Steelers home game would bar you from ever attending another Steelers game again, but I guess not. You would think if there was ever a guy who should have been barred from attending Steeler games, it should have been the guy who brought a gun into the stadium, literally opened fire, and shot an officer inside, grazing him in the head and nearly ending his life. But apparently not. Apparently, the Steelers allowed this man to continue buying tickets and did not put him on the do not attend or do not buy list, despite the fact that he literally shot a man inside the stadium during the game. I honestly don't even know what to say to that. I genuinely don't. I don't even have a good way to end this video with something witty or anything along those lines. All I can say is between current events, what happened in 1984, and the do not buy list apparently not applying for an active shooter, Pennsylvania can be an absolutely crazy state. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.